She wasn't flawless. She was real. When All in the Family slayed her off, fans were devastated. But was it just an actor's choice or something more? Behind the laughter and the applause, the decision carried shocking truths that forever altered television. Why did Jean Stapleton walk away from such an iconic role? How did Norman Lear handle the fallout? And what legacy did Edith leave behind? Today, we uncover everything. We'll explore Edith's creation, Stapleton's career, the cultural storm, and the lasting impact of her departure. The dingbat who changed television when All in the Family premiered in 1971. Audiences didn't quite know what to make of Edith Bunker. She wasn't glamorous, sophisticated, or particularly sharp-witted. In fact, Archie himself regularly dismissed her as a dingbat, a nickname that, in most sitcoms, would have doomed her being nothing more than a one-note punchline. Yet Jean Stapleton turned that supposed weakness into her greatest strength. By embracing Edith's naivety while injecting warmth, compassion, and subtle wisdom, she transformed what could have been a forgettable sidekick into the emotional heartbeat of one of television's most groundbreaking shows. From the start, Edith was crafted as Archie Bunker's opposite. Archie, played by Carroll O'Connor, was loud, opinionated, and abrasive. He embodied the stubborn resistance of America's older generation, grappling with civil rights, feminism, and cultural shifts of the 1970s. Edith, on the other hand, represented patience, kindness, and enduring love. She softened Archie's rough edges and gave viewers a reason to stick around when his tirades went too far. Without Edith's gentle presence, Archie might have been intolerable. With her, he became human, because Edith reminded audiences that even the most flawed person had someone who loved them. Jean Stapleton went well beyond playing dumb with Edith by filling her with contradictions. A woman who seemed scatterbrained but often spoke the most piercing truths. Meek but could stand up to Archie when it really mattered. Audiences would be lulled by the high pitch of her voice and her hesitant mannerisms, and struck by surprising flashes of wisdom. In this way, she helped make her not only relatable but revolutionary. She was a reflection of so many women of her generation, housewives who endured dismissiveness while quietly carrying families on their own backs. It was her anti-taboo stance that differentiated Edith. While Archie ranted about politics or hurled insults, Edith often became the character who humanized the debate. She would give voice to themes associated with women's rights, sexual misconduct, and health issues, places of heavy subject matter that ordinary viewers could relate to. In the episode where Edith has a problem, she demonstrated menopause on screen, a subject so rarely seen on television at the time. Edith then proceeded to dispense with all polite social conventions and talked openly about confronting breast cancer in Edith's Christmas Story. On Edith's 50th birthday, she found courage and resilience following an attempted assault in one of the most shocking sitcom episodes ever aired. Stapleton embedded sincerity into every one of those moments, allowing Edith to transcend being a character and become a trusted friend throughout living rooms in America. This was not the result of coincidence. Stapleton had worked on a stage for several years before appearing on television, and she treated Edith just as any other complicated dramatic role. She purposely shaped her mannerisms, the fluttering hands, the nasal queen's accent, the exaggerated pauses. Even her off-tone singing in the celebrated opening theme, "Those Were the Days," was a choice carefully concocted to show Edith's unrefined, real quality. The character could never feel like an actress in costume. Edith came off as a person who might just possibly live down the street from you, and that was exactly what made fans love her. After some seasons, Edith graduated from being just Archie's counterfoil, but she became the heart and soul of the show. That gave Edith's audience the opportunity to see, at least on her, the soft underbelly of Archie's hard exterior. Chap hadn't craved thy love. He merely wished to communicate that decency could prevail even in bigotry and conflict. Her so-called dingbat qualities would become instead symbols of endurance, humor, and unconditional love. No doubt it is not an exaggeration for us to say that Edith Bunker sort of began redefining what a sitcom wife could be. Lucy Ricardo or June Cleaver had nothing on these ladies. No glamour associated with Lucy or perfect integration, as with June. But she was real, relatable, and funny. Yet the woman who embodied Edith never wanted to be trapped in her shadow forever. Jean Stapleton's hidden struggle to millions of viewers. Jean Stapleton was Edith Bunker, For nearly a decade, she had embodied a role so convincingly that audiences assumed the actress and the character were one and the same. People on the street would call her Edith, not Jean, and they often expected her to act with the same wide-eyed innocence and ditzy humor they saw on television. But behind the scenes, Stapleton was an accomplished performer with decades of theater experience, and she quietly carried a fear that Edith was becoming both her blessing and her curse. Stapleton's career didn't begin with television fame. She had spent years honing her craft in Broadway productions, supporting musicals like Damn Yankees and Funny Girl, and establishing herself as a serious stage actress. To her, Edith Bunker was just one role, an important one, yes, but not the totality of her artistic ambition. She didn't want to be frozen in time as the dingbat, when she knew she had the range to tackle Shakespeare, Chekhov, or complex dramatic parts. Yet as All in the Family grew into a phenomenon, she realized that Edith's shadow was spreading wider than she ever anticipated. When she was at her peak, Stapleton rode it through and won 3 Emmy Awards and 2 Golden Globes for Edith. The unmistakably apparent talent was validated. But changes were not apparent as she became a victim of what casting directors could see in a very narrow band. In fact, she even became anxious that her high-pitched voice, quirks and mannerisms, scatterbrained charm would always see her as Edith in the eyes of her fans. Every time Stapleton stepped into a different stage or variation, she was still considered Edith in the eyes of the audience. Such typecasting could feel like one is trapped, perhaps in a golden cage, yet it confines you with restriction. It also had its toll, however. It was not easy for her to play Edith. While audiences adored the humor, Stapleton knew that bleakness lay just below the surface. In Bittersweet Love, enduring Edith loved her, but at times her husband Archie would deride her, "You're such a fool." That dynamic for Stapleton needed to balance comedy with its deeper truth. So many real women endure that kind of dismissal from their marriages. The demand for such a character, half-joked, half-sainthood, wasn't something one could discard after a day's shoot. By the time the 9th season of All in the Family rolled around, Stapleton had already begun hinting that it was time for her to move on. She had poured everything into Edith, and she feared that keeping it up now would only dilute the character even more in viewers' minds. To continue beyond this point, she believed, would jeopardize Edith's chances of being herself rather than becoming an exaggerated stereotype. It wasn't a happy realization. Stapleton loved Edith, and she loved working with Carol O'Connor and all the others. But for all those things, she knew her being an actress must be bigger than one unforgettable role. A conversation with the show's creator, Norman Lear, was based on both respect and sorrow. He was also a loss as to how he could ever explain to such a person not only losing Edith, but also how it would figure the loss to himself. He reportedly told Stapleton, "To me, she isn't just a character." But Stapleton stood firm. Edith was fictional, yes, but Jean Stapleton was very real, and she had more stories to tell than the ones trapped inside 704 Hauser Street. It wasn't that Stapleton stepped down in a huff or from sheer exhaustion. Rather, it was a deliberate act of self-care. Stapleton was protecting her career as well as Edith's legacy. She felt the character was better off with dignity than disappearing into the shadows. This choice, in a sense, shows her respect for Edith. She had no wish for audiences to tire of her. She certainly would not tolerate them seeing her regarded as some caricature. But when Stapleton made her decision, Norman Lear faced a choice no producer wanted: replace Edith or bury her. Why Edith's death was inevitable once Jean Stapleton made the difficult decision to leave Norman Lear and the creative team behind All in the Family, and its continuation, Archie Bunker's place. Were left with a problem unlike any they had ever faced. How do you continue a series when its most beloved character is gone? For Lear, Edith wasn't just another role to be recast or quietly written out. She was the heart of the show, the one person who softened Archie and anchored the family dynamic. Removing her without explanation would feel dishonest. Replacing her with another actress? Unthinkable. This is why Edith's death became not just an option, but an inevitability. Lear believed that Edith was too singular to be replicated. Stapleton had given her quirks, warmth, and contradictions that no other performer could capture. Viewers would reject any substitute as inauthentic, and the risk of tarnishing Edith's legacy was too great. So Lear took the bold path. Edith's story had to end. The method of that conclusion was just as important. The writing staff could have scripted an over-theatrical on-screen death, but Lear and Stapleton felt Edith deserved a dignified death without the flamboyance. Her death wouldn't turn into a collar-jerking cry-a-thon or a rating stunt. She would simply die, quietly and conveniently off-screen, from a stroke. This smacked of how death normally comes in the course of real life. Sudden, quiet, and shattering. Fitting for a program that had taken pride in its authenticity. This choice was made. That decision threw shockwaves behind the scenes. By the late 70s and early 80s, television wasn't used to major characters dying, especially in sitcoms. Death wasn't dealt with much at all, and when it was softened or treated symbolically. Slaying off Edith broke that unspoken rule of TV, that the audiences could always count on their comfort characters to be there. The breaking of this expectation was what Lear was doing, mapping television into uncharted emotional territory. This comes, too, with the intentions of Stapleton, for Lear had always been direct. If Edith were left alive somewhere in the universe of the show, the audiences would keep pinning on hope that she might return. The death of Edith in the narrative strand would have ensured closure in Stapleton and clarity. No more lingering what-ifs, no more chances of Edith climbing through the door in season whatever. It was final and, therefore, honest. In many ways, Edith's death echoed the arc of All in the Family itself. The series had always been about facing unpalatable truths. Racism, sexism, war, class wars. Death was the last taboo it had not confronted head-on. In this last moment, Edith's death opened the door to that final taboo all sitcoms for decades had skirted around, mortality. It made both Archie and the audience deal with loss, grief, and the painful fact that life does not always tie things up neatly with a bow. For Carol O'Connor, the loss of Edith was not only a professional trauma, it was deeply personal. He and Stapleton forged a relationship that came through vividly to the public, since it rested on mutual affection and respect. Without Edith, Archie would have to stand alone, and O'Connor knew it would test both his own acting and the tenability of the show. After all, Lear was counting on audiences accepting this change as long as it felt real. The writing team devised a careful scenario for handling Edith's absence. Rather than slaying her in an episode, they gave her death a season off. Thus, the audience would learn of her death by Archie's state of mourning, and not by some dramatic hospital scene or farewell in the nick of time. This decision carried the weight of feeling for the aftermath instead of the event itself, thus giving the show a depth never attempted by most sitcoms. What came next was one of television's most gut-wrenching moments. Archie alone in the silence Edith left behind. Archie alone. A nation grieves when the second season of Archie Bunker's Place premiered in the fall of 1980. Fans tuned in with a mixture of dread and curiosity. They had heard rumors. They had read news clippings hinting at a painful goodbye. But nothing could fully prepare them for Archie Alone, the two-part episode that would deal with Edith's death. It was one of the most emotional hours in sitcom history, a gut punch that left millions of viewers in tears. The decision to have Edith die off-screen meant that the focus was not on her final moments, but on Archie's grief. Carol O'Connor carried the weight of that choice with astonishing vulnerability. In the episode, Edith has already passed away from a stroke, and Archie is left stumbling to the fog of denial. At first, he refuses to move her things, clinging to the illusion that she might still walk through the door. He pushes away neighbors and friends who try to console him, snapping with anger, then collapsing into silence. For a character defined by bluster and bravado, Archie's brokenness was startling. Archie is forced to go through Edith's possessions, and it is one of the most memorable scenes. Reluctantly, he begins packing, only to later discover one of her slippers pink underneath the bed. In holding that precious object, as if alluding to Archie's defenses, crumbles. "You had no right to leave me that way," he whispers through tears, breaking down in a way audiences had never seen before. It was raw, unpolished, and devastatingly real. Many fans later said it was the first time they ever saw their fathers cry while watching television. This had not been just Archie's grief, but the grief of an entire nation. For nearly a decade, Edith Bunker was part of American households. Her voice, her laughter, her patience. All these were woven into the very fabric of family life. Losing her, even given that she was a fictional character, was akin to losing someone comfortably familiar. The viewers were mourning not just Edith, but the end of an era. The critics praised the episode for being honest. During a time when serious emotion was shunned by most sitcoms, Archie alone dared to step forward and present the messy, painful truth about loss. It spared nothing in depicting grief and had no desire to speed through it. Archie exhibited denial, anger, and finally quiet collapse, stages in mourning that audiences recognized in their own lives. In this respect, the show authorized its audience to mourn not only Edith but their loved ones as well. The admission of the episode by Carol O'Connor was that it was one of the most difficult episodes he had ever filmed. He had a true relationship with Jean Stapleton after long years of working together, and the mutual regard and respect that came as a result. Although she was alive and going to other roles, O'Connor said that he would feel as if he had really lost her when he filmed Archie's breakdown. You could see that authenticity shine through on-screen, making this performance one of the best of his career. What made Archie Alone even more extraordinary was how it shattered the glass ceiling of television storytelling. Comedies were historically great sources of easy laughs and happy endings. Yet, in this episode, tragedy ran deep and laughter and tears were not opposed but rather supplementary. Much in the same way, Edith's absence lent the show a maturity it had never fully received. Growing up required forcing Archie and America to grow up. Even after her death, Edith would continue to influence the story. For Archie, grief would become an ongoing theme that he dealt with as he came to try to adjust to life sans Edith. The absence of her comforting touch made that void truly felt. This was the first time the audience realized how much Archie had depended on Edith, since he was so obviously fragile in her absence. But everything seemed to remain, even as she departed, all vowing to unite her viewers recall the irreplaceable vacuum she left in both Archie's and their lives. And while audiences mourned, Stapleton quietly forged a new path for herself. Life after Edith for audiences. Edith Bunker's death felt final. For Jean Stapleton, however, it marked the beginning of a new journey. Stepping away from a role that had defined her for nearly a decade was risky. Many actors never escaped the shadow of their most famous characters, and Stapleton knew she carried the weight of Edith wherever she went. Yet rather than retreat, she embraced the challenge of building a life and career after the dingbat. Almost immediately, Stapleton pursued roles that showcased her range. She had spent years proving she could embody a housewife from Queens, but her heart had always belonged to the stage. Returning to the theater felt like returning home. She performed in touring productions of classics like Arsenic and Old Lace and The Gin Game, as well as in Shakespearean roles that reminded audiences of her dramatic chops. By taking these parts, she sent a clear message. Jean Stapleton was not Edith Bunker. The new television opportunities opened up for Stapleton to accept selected roles that sharply contrasted with her former image. They took her into a hodgepodge of series types, from drama to comedy, playing guest spots on such widely different shows as Murphy Brown and Touched by an Angel. These kinds of performances also gave her a chance to exercise different creative demands. Sometimes she played strong-willed, no-nonsense women, the very antithesis of Edith in her soft-spoken role, and then there were times she embraced kooky characters in a different spirit. Stapleton acted very intentionally in these choices. She didn't want to erase Edith, though she certainly would not let her be the only voice she had. Stapleton made illustrious film appearances as well. She was seen in Michael, an angel comedy starring John Travolta, giving warmth to a quirky role, and she worked on little cable television movies, often choosing projects that resonated with her personal beliefs. Fame was not for Stapleton. It was about acting, living other people's lives, and telling their stories. Yet, no matter how many roles she played, interviews and public appearances always circled back to Edith. Stapleton handled this with grace. She never expressed bitterness about being remembered primarily for one role. Instead, she acknowledged Edith's importance while gently reminding people that she was an actress capable of much more. "She is not me," Stapleton once said of Edith, "but I understood her." That distinction was crucial. Stapleton could honor Edith without being consumed by her. As years went by, Stapleton in many ways faded out of limelight. By about 2000, she had retired from acting, leaving a record that likely ran far beyond Queen's. She was inducted into the Television Hall of Fame in 2002, and that was a tribute worthy of both Edith and the woman who portrayed her. Edith was adored by the fans, while Stapleton was respected by her peers for her integrity, courage, and